My wife and I moved into our new apartment just a few months ago. It was a downgrade from our previous home, as we lived in a large but quaint cottage. It had been my wife's dream home for the 3 years we lived there. We didn't want to leave, but it was a necessary step for us. You see, Jessica used to live down south. Everything was going well for a while, but my law firm decided to promote me out of the blue. It was unexpected, but very much appreciated. Unfortunately, the job entailed transferring to another one of our many locations. The one in question was located in New England. We spoke long and hard on the matter, and after much deliberation, Jess agreed to move. It's important to note that the dollar doesn't stretch as far up north as it does down south. It's also hard to find employment. That's why we were downgrading our living spaces. Until Jess could find another job, we would have to suffer. At least that's the way she looked at it. Tensions were high the first week after the move. I could tell Jess was irritable. She missed her old house, her old friends, and working on a steady job, she had nothing to do with her time, so she was bored out of her mind. This led to many fights. For a while, it seemed like we would never settle in. About a month after the move, things started looking up. Jess found temporary work as a part-time editor at the local TV station. She loved the work, and I couldn't have been happier with her co-workers. It seemed like everything was going fine. Not perfect, but fine. This is when the sleep-talking began. It was to be expected, and honestly, I'm surprised it didn't start up sooner. You see, my wife is a restless sleeper. Whenever there's a big change in her life, good or bad. It happened when we got married, and when she moved into our first home, and when she had the miscarriage. I'll touch on that more later. Jess knows she sleep talks, as I used to bring it up from time to time. I would laugh each morning, recalling the weird things she said the night before. This always made her uncomfortable. She seemed to be embarrassed by it. That's why after her first night of sleep talking in our new apartment, I didn't say anything. The sleep talking went on for a couple of weeks. It was at this time that her temp job at the TV station came to an end. Without a job to keep her mind off things, her nightly outbursts became worse. She began screaming at odd times during the night, in which I would be forced to calm her down. One night, her scream turned into tears. As she was crying, she said something I'll never forget.
I wish you were dead.
I knew my wife was asleep, but as I sat there by her side, calming her the best I could, I felt the need to press the matter. You wish I were dead, hun? To my surprise, she responded. This caught me off guard. It's a strange thing to want your husband dead, and even stranger when you're asleep. Why? I asked.
You're ruining my life.
Those 4 words cut deep. Whether they were meant or merely the product of a tired mind, they were the kind of words that demand self-reflection. I wondered for a moment if I really was ruining her life, or at least if I were to blame her for the night terrors. My wife remained silent for the rest of the night. I know this because I stayed up. Contemplation and worry kept me from a good night's rest. I didn't believe for a second that my wife actually wanted me dead, but her late-night antics were certainly a cause for concern. Between the screaming episodes and the morbid dialogue, this was her worst condition that had ever been. The next morning came. I came pretty damn close to telling her about what happened, but I kept thinking about how she would react and what she'd say. It was too much. I didn't want to burden her any more than I already had, especially after she'd just been laid off. In light of this, I kept my mouth shut. The following night, the screams were gone. This was a comfort, but a fleeting one. Out of the blue, just as I was about to shut my eyes and call it a night, the sleep-talking commenced once again.
Sometimes I anything about how I'll do it.
I chalked this statement up to pure dream-induced nonsense, but then she continued.
While you're asleep, in bed, I'll get up and go to the kitchen.
I didn't know what she was talking about, but as she kept speaking, it dawned on me. There were some moments of inaudible gibberish, but from the bits and pieces that were fluent, I could paint a pretty good picture of what she was saying.
Reach into, grab a knife, over and over again, blood oozing off the bed, can't run my life anymore.
Reach into, grab knife, over and over again, blood oozing off the bed, can't ruin my life anymore. My wife was describing her plan to murder me. As deeply unsettled as this was, I couldn't help but chuckle to myself. It was just a dream after all. Nothing more. I can't say I haven't done some weird things in my own dreams. Things I would never do in real life. Jess was mad at me over the move, and she was working out her frustrations while she was asleep. At least that's what I was convincing myself. The sleep talking continued for a few weeks. I hoped that her midnight venting sessions were doing her some good, but without a degree in psychology, I couldn't be certain. All I could do was listen to her ramble about offing me each night and wait for her condition to run its course. The longest her sleep talking had ever lasted was a month, so it was safe to say it would be over soon. A month passed, and then two. Jess, she didn't let up. Every night it was the same routine, either incoherent nonsense or babblings about how she would like to hurt me. It was getting old, but one night changed everything.
I lost my baby because of you.
My emotions swirled about and a formed sour concoction that rested in the pit of my stomach. This time I had known what she meant. What do you mean, hun? There was a brief moment of silence, but eventually Jess offered me an answer. There was more gibberish mixed in, but she was able to get her point across.
You made me want kids. You put life in me. Now I flow.
This struck a nerve and caused a few tears to roll down my cheek. It was my idea to try and have a kid. Jess never wanted children, but she made herself want to for me. That's why, after the miscarriage, I was surprised to find her absolutely devastated. I had no clue how much she'd warmed up to the idea of having a baby. My tears were interrupted by more sleep talking of the worst variety.
I will kill you. I promise.
That was the last thing she said all night. It's been roughly a week since my wife made that promise. As disturbing as that threat was, I could have easily brushed it off with the rest, assuming it too was the product of stress and nothing more for me to worry about. Unfortunately, I can't stop worrying about it. Jess is scaring the crap out of me. I'm now taking short naps and sleeping with one eye open, and it's all because of one thing. At first I thought she was just getting up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. It quickly became apparent this was not the case. She would wander around our room, seemingly searching for something, and when I called out her name, she wouldn't respond. I tried to remain calm, but she had never sleptwalked before. This and her malicious sleep-talking put me on edge. I ended up telling her about it one morning, not the sleep-talking, but the sleepwalking. I hoped she would have shed some light on the issue, or at least opt for some help or medication of some sort. She didn't either. After telling about it, she laughed. She couldn't believe she sleptwalked for the first time, and this amused her. She wasn't all concerned, it seemed. I did my best to mirror Jess's carefree stance on the subject. This became more and more difficult as time went on. She kept sleep-talking and sleepwalking. It wasn't until one night in particular, in which they occurred at the same time, that I became truly worried. Jess shuffled out of bed, waking me up in the process. I sighed in disappointment, knowing it was another one of her episodes. I kept still so as to not startle her, though I remained alert, lending a cautious ear to the room, mapping out her movements in my mind for the sake of my own safety. I didn't want this sleepwalking version of Jess anywhere near me. She gave me the creeps. As she stumbled about the room, I patted myself on the back for hiding the one thing I didn't want her to find. I was so spooked the first night she sleptwalked that I took all the sharp knives out of the kitchen drawer and put them in a shoebox underneath my bed. I still didn't think she was going to kill me, but you can never be too safe. Knowing the only weapons in the house were hidden, I felt secure and almost fell back asleep. Jess put an end to that. A few words that told me the knives were not what she was looking for.
Where's my baby?
Startled, I jumped in an instant. I must have drifted off for a moment, because I hadn't even noticed that Jess was standing right next to me. I looked her up and down, and sure enough, she was still asleep. Her eyes were glazed over, and her eyelids were drooping. It took me a moment to gather my wits and process what she had asked. "You don't have a baby, hun?" Jess's head tilted to one side, almost as she was confused.
You took my baby from me.
This was about the miscarriage again. I wondered if awake, Jess would feel the same way. I wondered if she was still holding on to her unborn child. "I didn't take anything, hun." It was hard to see in the dark, but I swear her facial expression went sour when I said that.
You gave me life. You took it away.
I didn't have it in me to keep arguing. I mean, how does one reason with someone who's unconscious? I stayed silent and waited patiently for her to go back to bed. After a minute or two, she finally did. Upon lying down, she turned to me and offered one last sentiment.
I will kill you.
The next day, I was more than a little bit off. I was so rattled by that last incident that I couldn't even bring myself to eat breakfast. Jess, she noticed this and asked me what was going on. At first I told her it was nothing, just a lack of sleep. This was partly true, but it wasn't the real reason for my anxiousness. It clawed at me until I finally came clean about the whole ordeal. I told Jess everything. I didn't leave a single detail out. She kept quiet while I spoke, so I had no clue what was going on through her head. After absolutely everything was out in the open, I shut my mouth and waited for her reaction. I was greeted with silence. "Well, do you have anything to say, or?" She looked at me with sad eyes before she spoke.
I guess this means I need help.
I was relieved to hear her say this. What was happening was a big problem for both of us, but I knew we could overcome it together. Just asked some more questions about her nightly adventures, and we talked a little more about what to do next. A big weight had lifted off my shoulders, so it's settled then. I'll call Dr. Harrison and set up the appointment for tomorrow. Dr. Harrison was the physician for both our families. We'd been seeing him since we were children, and that's actually how we ended up meeting later on in our college years. If anyone knew what to do in this situation, it would be him. Content with our game plan, I headed to the door to leave for work. I almost made it, but a couple of things stayed with me. I couldn't take off just yet. I needed some peace of mind, and the only way to attain it would be to confront Jess with a couple of questions. I sat back down at the kitchen table. Jess, hun, have you moved on? Are you past the miscarriage? She looked at me as if she was shocked I would even ask about that. She paused, but eventually lit up.
No, I guess not. I thought I was, but maybe I just bottled it up deep down and that's what's causing all of this. Maybe if I do move on, it will all stop. The sleep talking, my stress, all of it. I hope the shrink can help.
I put my hand on hers and held it for a brief moment before putting forth my much more awkward query. And you don't really want to kill me, right? She grabbed my hand and clenched it tight.
Of course not. How could you say that? I don't know why I've been saying those things in my sleep, but I love you. I always have.
I smiled. This put my mind at ease. The situation wasn't exactly a good one, but I felt like I was growing closer to Jess. Our bond couldn't be broken, not after this. We were finally tending to our old wounds, and I couldn't have been happier about it. I was elated. That night, our room was quiet for a good long while. No shuffling around, no getting out of bed, no nothing. It was peaceful. As such, I slept better than I had in months. Near the end of the night, however, the familiar sound of Jess crawling out of bed woke me up. It appeared that my good night's rest was too good to be true. Jess got out of bed as she normally did when she sleptwalked. But that's when the sound stopped. I didn't hear her walking around the room this time. I thought maybe she'd gone to the bathroom, but then I realized I hadn't heard the bedroom door open either. I decided it might be in my best interest to see what was going on. So I rolled onto my back, sat up, and rubbed my eyes to get a better view. There, at the foot of our bed, was Jess. She was standing still as ever, and looking directly at me. A batch of familiar words ensued. Being used to this routine by now, I attempted to coax her back to bed. "Honey, you're asleep. Come back to bed." She continued staring at me. She then replied with 2 words I will soon never forget.
I'm wide awake.
What do you mean you're awake?
That's right. In fact, I was never asleep any of the times you heard me talking.
I was baffled by my wife's statement. I looked at her in disbelief, unsure how to respond. "What are you talking about?" is all I could bring myself to say. She became hysterical and started crying.
I don't want a baby. I didn't want to move. I didn't want any of this. But I felt I had to because of you. I'm drowning in your life, so low beneath the water I can't even breathe.
I listened intently to what my wife was saying, but I couldn't find it in me to comfort her. I didn't know what she needed to hear, and I didn't know how to help.
And after I lost the baby, that was it. I changed. Having a living thing inside me just die like that was a hell of a thing to go through. My goals, my priorities, my emotions, they all changed. My whole world was different. I couldn't even close my eyes at night without seeing the face of our unborn child in my dreams. I can't take it anymore. I just can't.
I moved closer to my wife in an attempt to console her. She pulled out a kitchen's knife from behind her back, stopping me dead in my tracks. Hun, are you crazy? What are you doing? Put the goddamn knife down.
You think I didn't notice the shoebox under the bed?
I looked directly into her eyes. All I could see was hatred and tears. She truly didn't want me alive, and I could feel it. I knew Jess was distraught, but I had no idea to this extent. If only I had noticed. If only I'd paid more attention.
You made me want a baby. You did this to me.
She paused for a moment and wiped some tears away before continuing.
Don't you want to see our baby? I wonder if it's a boy or a girl. I bet it's a boy. I can see him now. Our beautiful son. He has your eyes. Can't you see it, honey? Don't you want to be there with me?
I couldn't believe it. My wife was farther gone than I could have ever guessed. She wanted to kill me and herself so she could be with our baby again. I needed to do something, and fast. Okay, hon, you're right. Let's do it. Jess's face lit up as I said this, but I was only trying to buy a little time. I slowly got out of bed so as not to alert her to my plan. Once I was standing in position, I quickly grabbed the comforter off the bed and tossed it at my wife. I then ran past her as quickly as I could. I felt a sharp jab in the process. Her knife had pierced the blanket and a little bit of my skin. Still, I made it out of the bedroom and into the bathroom, where I swiftly slammed the door and shut and locked it behind me. I was safe for the time being. I would have ran straight out of the apartment if I thought I could have made it, but we have a deadbolt on it, and it sometimes sticks. Chances are she'd have reached me before I could unlock the damn thing. Being stuck in the bathroom wasn't good enough for me. Jess jiggled the knob a few times in anger. Once she realized I had locked it, she began screaming and banging on the door as hard as she could. This lasted for all 3 minutes before she broke down and started crying. That's when she tried reasoning with me.
Don't you want to see our baby? I wonder if it's a boy or a girl. I bet it's a boy. I can see him now. Our beautiful son. He has your eyes. Can't you see it, honey? Don't you want to be there with me?
I didn't respond. Anything I could say wouldn't make a difference. Jess had gone off the deep end and there was no way back up. I felt sorry for her, but in that moment I was feeling much more sorry for myself. All I could think about was getting the hell out of there. Jess stopped talking to me after a while. I heard her crying for a little bit, but eventually that stopped too. Silence began to fill our apartment, and half of me wondered for a split second if she had passed out or something, but my other half told me it could be all part of her plan. She wanted to lure me out, and then go for the kill when I least expected it. Without a clear course of action, I stayed put. It was all I could do. An hour passed, and then another. I was growing tired, but I didn't want to fall back asleep. For all I knew, that's what she was waiting for, and she could pick the lot without me noticing. Nice try, hon, but you'll have to do better than that. Even still, I could feel myself drifting off. I knew that eventually I would end up fast asleep. Whether it was actually a decent plan or the byproduct of exhausted brain, I decided that I'd have to make a run for it. I prepared as best as I could. I let the sink drip quietly and I placed my hands under it. I threw water in my face in an effort to stay alert. I shut the bathroom light off and stayed in there for about 10 minutes or so my eyes could adjust to the dark. I fed myself the classic "it's now or never" pep talk, and then turned the bathroom knob. This was it. I opened the door slowly. I looked around and made a mental map of the apartment. Living room to my left, kitchen around the corner, then the apartment door. There was a recliner near the corner, so I had to be aware of that and not trip on my way out. I looked over at the bedroom and I noticed the door was shut. This was a good sign. Perhaps Jess locked herself in. Without thinking about it too much, I dashed out in haste. I ran straight for the living room couch, giving myself plenty of room for a wide turn. Upon turning, it was a straight shot to the apartment door, right past the kitchen. Jess was nowhere to be found. With this in mind, I sprinted towards the door. But when I ran past the kitchen, something impeded my escape, something sharp. Just as I was about to make my getaway, Jess came out from the kitchen and thrusted her blade into my shoulder. I fell back against the wall and screamed in agony. She'd been waiting there this whole time. I should have been more careful, I thought, in hindsight. I should have tippy-toed about and surveyed my surroundings a bit more. But I was tired and scared at the same time. Jess pulled out the knife, and instead of stabbing me again like I expected, she spoke.
Our baby will be so happy.
Jess was proud. She finally stabbed me. But it was clear she didn't have a plan past the first blood. Maybe she thought one stab is all it would take, or maybe she was just too tired to think straight. Either way, I took advantage of her absent-mindedness. Though it was painful to move, I bolted back to the living room. I purposely brushed against the recliner, making sure to get as close to it as possible without stumbling into it. Just as I had hoped, Jess followed me to a T. She collided with the chair and fell face first on the floor. I turned back and ran right over her. I reached the door and fiddled with the lock and got out of there quickly as I could. With the help of my neighbor, I called 911 and I was taken away on the stretcher. I lost a lot of blood, but they patched me up just fine. As for my wife, she didn't make it. She could have escaped before the authorities showed up, but she didn't. She cut open her wrist and bled out on the living room floor. Nothing would stop her from being with our baby. I guess in her mind, one parent was better than none. In the wake of all this, I don't know how to feel. I'm equal parts a wreck now that my wife's dead, as I am happy to be alive after escaping her. I keep blaming myself for what happened, but I could have never imagined it would have led to this. Though I may never get over what happened, I hope Jessica is happy. She doesn't have to feel trapped anymore. I love you.